So my idea here is I'm going to take the source select button on the steering wheel, and you have two settings for each button. One is quick press, just a press and release, and one is a press and hold. And I'm going to set the press and hold on the source select to be bring up the climate control screen. Hopefully that's going to be successful, but we'll see when we get on to programming it.
As far as the stereo install, where we've got to is I have integrated the aftermarket stereo harness with the MUS1 idatalink T harness. I'll put the buttons, such as they are, on the MUS1 faceplate. My guess is I'm not going to have access to any of these buttons, so it doesn't really matter, but I did program them. I found I've got this set to home page of the radio, gauge page of the radio, and info page for the car. That goes to climate, and that goes to turn on the window defrost. And I have assembled the brackets onto the head unit for the JVC head unit.
The MUS1 dash kit T harness requires one splice to the factory sync harness. Remove the glove box and pull the main harness connector off the sync module. Then locate the blue with red stripe wires. There are two of them, and the one you want is the finer gauge wire. You'll cut this wire and splice the harness end to the aftermarket harness, leaving the sync module end disconnected. idatalink's multimeter test procedure to confirm the correct wire didn't work for me, but when you cut the right wire, the phone and voice buttons will stop working on sync, so that is a better test. You have to identify this wire before you remove the old stereo, and you should have the battery disconnected when you are unplugging and reconnecting the harness and cutting the wire. Removing the old radio should be easy, but the factory harness doesn't have a lot of slack and the connectors are difficult to reach. So after you remove the 4 screws holding the head unit in place, take your time to release the tabs on each of the connectors on the back of the radio. As you release connectors, you'll get an increasing amount of play, which makes it easier to get at the next ones. The AM/FM antenna plug looks like it has a release tab, but it doesn't, and just requires a considerable amount of force to pull straight out of the back of the stereo. I disconnected it last. So I've been messing around with fitment of this new JVC 1000. And I think I'm going to set this screen at the maximum height. It's going to keep it out of that shifter. It's going to give good access to the pocket where I'm going to use wireless charging. And there's virtually nothing on that sync display that isn't replicated on the screen. The new JVC stereo requires a number of accessory mounts. First is this microphone, which I chose to mount on the steering column. It's a good place, easily accessible, and because it was so difficult to get the wiring for the dash cam strung along the edge of the windshield, I thought it's a lot easier to mount it here. The JVC stereo also requires its own GPS antenna in order to work correctly with CarPlay. That's mounted in the corner of the dash on the passenger side. Fairly unobtrusive and relatively easy to run the wiring. Once all your accessories like the mic, GPS antenna, and OBD2 harness are in place, and their wiring is run back to the radio area, tie up any excess wiring with zip ties to try and make it as neat as possible, and then begin connecting everything together. Plug all the connections into the Maestro and slide it forward along the transmission tunnel to keep it out of the way. I used a wireless backup camera and a wired USB adapter for wireless phone charging, which were connected back to a 12-volt switch source from an ATA circuit tap in the passenger side fuse panel. The dual USB power was connected to the wireless phone charger and to the passenger side USB port in the phone pocket on the MUS1 dash kit. The receiver for the wireless backup camera was located in the console, as far away from the head unit as possible to reduce interference. You'll need a video extension cable or RCA gender bender to extend the video wiring into the console too. The final step is to plug the new head unit into the harness and gently slide it in place, making sure not to pinch or crush any of the wiring and components that are trying to occupy the same space. Once you have the head unit in place, make the final connections to the MUS1 faceplate, including the USB connections and the panel connector. Then snap it in place on the dash. You can then connect the screen by gently sliding it in place on the head unit and installing the screws. These screws are awkward, so be sure not to cross-thread them. I used a combination of Phillips screwdrivers, needle nose pliers, a magnetic pickup tool, and quarter drive socket set with universal adapter to get them all in place. You will also need to install the plastic cover with the 2 tiny Phillips head screws. If you don't, the stereo will not power up. Before putting the console back in place, I like to check that everything boots up and works correctly, and that it plays Night Ranger like it should. I've seen guys hardwire the OBD2 feed to the harness, but this can cause issues with programming or diagnosing the car later. Always plug into the OBD2 connector with the supplied plug, or use a splitter cable to share the port with another scan gauge. Then, when programming or diagnosing the car, you can easily unplug all of the third-party accessories to avoid interference. When using a splitter, my Aeroforce interceptor gauge monopolized the OBD2 data link and caused the connection to the stereo to be marked disabled, which shut off gauge functionality on the JVC head unit. To fix this problem, go into Settings, OEM Settings, Gauges, then select OBD2 Communication and set it to Always Enabled.
I programmed the source button so that if you press and hold it, it brings up the climate screen. Here I can change my temperature, I can change my fan speed, I can change my air door settings, defrost, rear window defrost, heated seats. Any of the climate settings that I need to change. What's more, I programmed the volume and forward and rewind buttons so that if you press and hold, you get fan up, fan down, temperature up, temperature down. When you do this, if you press this for fan up, you get one click fan up, but it brings up the climate screen so you can make little adjustments. And when you're done making adjustments, it will automatically go back to the screen that it was on.